These are familiar images, images which for most of us define our understanding of the Third World. For many of us, all that we know about this group of nations is what we've acquired either from advertisements from charities or from the few references to developing countries which are considered newsworthy by the mainstream media. That usually means stories about natural disasters, wars, political turmoil, or poverty. I'm Rick McDaniel. I'm the International Program Director at the YMCA in Fredericton, and one of the responsibilities of my position is to ensure that a more balanced portrait of Third World countries is presented to Canadians than these traditional images provide. And yet, even in this series, we've used imagery like this, imagery that some people have referred to as a form of development pornography. One of the many problems with pornography is the way it desensitizes people, as I think these images have begun to desensitize people. A lot of people no longer respond to these pictures. They've lost their impact. They've become so commonplace that we assume that's just the way things are in the Third World and nothing can be done about it. That's a reaction I'm encountering more and more frequently when I give public presentations. And I understand why people feel that way. After all, we've been seeing these pictures now for more than 30 years. And judging from the pictures used in these campaigns, things haven't got any better for the people of the South over the last 3 decades. The message these advertising campaigns seem to give is that conditions in developing nations are so hopeless that the people there even need our help in order to look after their children properly. Of course, the images that are used have been chosen for their emotional impact. Pictures of children who might not look like they live in North America, who dress a little differently and perhaps live in housing which looks a little odd to us, but who are otherwise obviously well cared for, happy, and apparently healthy, those images aren't going to goad us into donating money, so they aren't used. It's not that these images are entirely dishonest. Situations like these exist all too frequently in the Third World, but they're not the whole story. It's a little bit like this. Suppose I were making a video about this city, Fredericton, but all I concentrated on were the food bank, the community kitchen, the community shelter. Now, those are real aspects of life in Fredericton, but they're not the whole story, and it would be inappropriate to present them as if they were reflective of the community as a whole. So what am I suggesting here? Am I saying that things are really better in the Third World than the news media and advertising campaigns suggest? Have there been any significant improvements in conditions in the Third World over the last 30 years? And you know, the answer you get to that question depends upon the criteria you use to measure improvement. If what you're looking at are the usual economic indicators which banks and other credit rating agencies like to use, then virtually all Third World countries, with the exception of a handful in Asia, are now worse off than they were 30 years ago. And I think that should make us question the things that we've supposedly been doing to help these nations. The last time I did my income tax, I noticed a circle graph on the cover of the tax guide. A loonie was divided into segments to show me where my tax dollars went. So many cents out of each dollar goes to service our debt, so much goes to health care, so much goes to social programs, and 2 cents out of each tax dollar goes in aid to other countries. Well, Canada's not the only country to have a foreign aid budget. Most of the developed nations of the North do. And we've been providing this kind of aid to developing countries for a long time now. So, has it been doing any good? Well, apparently not much, but then there are some reasons for that. Do you remember the topic of the first program in this series, point of view? Well, one of the reasons why development projects haven't always gone as well as they should have is because of the point of view that we've come from. Let me give you an example. This is a story which has become something of a legend in development circles. It's about a bunch of Canadian agricultural specialists who are asked to help this village in Africa that's located in an area where the farming should be pretty good. But this particular community isn't raising enough food to be able to feed itself. Well, when the Canadians get there, they discover that there are some very simple things that can be done to improve food production. What's more, the village has everything they need in order to make these changes. They were very simple things, you know, establishing some windbreaks, ensuring proper crop rotation, proper drainage, and so on. So the Canadians gather all of the men in the village together. Very carefully, very clearly, they explain the changes that should be made to improve their food production. They make sure that each of the men understands that the village has all the resources they need to be able to do this themselves. And they make sure that each of the men understands the value of making these changes. Then, because the Canadians wanted to ensure that the Africans had a sense of ownership of this project, they left, leaving the Africans to implement it themselves. Well, a year goes by. It's time for the Canadians to write up their project report. So they send one of their members back to the community, and he looks things over, and he discovers that not one of their recommendations had been carried out. That was because, of course, all of the farming in the village, it was done by women. The Canadians hadn't bothered to speak to them. All too often in the past, development projects sponsored by countries like Canada haven't worked because we failed to take into consideration some fundamental differences in the way in which societies operate. In Canada, it's natural to assume that farming is a male occupation. In much of Africa, on the other hand, it has traditionally been a female occupation. There are hundreds of well-documented stories about development projects which employed inappropriate or non-sustainable technologies, which were culturally inappropriate or which were simply poorly planned. And mistakes like these not only thwart our best intended efforts to be of assistance, they can even result in long-lasting resentments. But then on closer examination, it turns out that, at least in some cases, the reason why these development projects weren't planned as well as they should have been is because they were designed more to help the donor than the recipient. 65% of Canada's development assistance dollars never leave Canada. They go to Canadian corporations to fund large-scale development projects like the construction of hydroelectric dams, highway systems, sewage treatment programs, huge irrigation projects, and so on. Even scholarships to Canadian universities are considered foreign aid. The Canadian universities and corporations which signed these contracts obviously benefited from them, but we have to question just how much benefit they were to the people of the South. The justification for this kind of funding is that it's supposed to help establish an infrastructure which promotes economic stability and lays the groundwork for future development. Well, if we judge them by that criteria, they've been a failure, because virtually all third world countries are now less economically stable than they were 30 years ago. So things have gotten worse, right? Remember, I said that the answer you get to that question depends upon the criteria used to measure improvement? Because it turns out that over the same 30-year period, there have been some significant improvements at the community level throughout the third world. Although there are still parts of the world which suffer from periodic drought, overall, there have been significant advances in food production worldwide, and nutrition in third world nations has generally improved. In fact, globally, we produce enough food, in particular cereal grains, to ensure that everyone on the planet could have an adequate diet. The fact that there are still hungry people in the world has primarily to do with the way that food is distributed. Access to education has also improved throughout the third world, in particular the access which girls have to education. Since 1960, the world literacy rate for women has doubled, and there have been some immediate and spectacular benefits resulting from these improvements. The children of a woman who has had as little as 4 years of education are more than twice as likely to survive infancy as are the children of women who can't read or write. So, as the education of girls improves, there has also been a reduction in the infant mortality rates. Many childhood diseases have been controlled. Approximately 80% of the world's children have been immunized against the 6 major infectious diseases, and other diseases, like smallpox, have been eliminated. Because more children are surviving infancy and early childhood, the birth rate has also begun to come down. United Nations statistics have demonstrated that wherever in the world basic income and health needs have been met, birth rates have stabilized. All of this, improved nutrition, improved health care for children, improved literacy, has resulted in an overall improvement in life expectancy throughout the Third World. And these improvements in the standard of living, improvements in the quality of life at the community level, are what matter to ordinary men and women. Ordinary people don't care about the current credit rating of their nation. What they care about is the quality of life at the community level. Are their children healthy? Do they have reasonable access to a decent standard of living, to food and shelter? These are the issues that matter. And it turns out that the majority of the money going to promote this kind of development comes from the people of the South themselves. They've been the ones who have identified the needs of their communities and have sought effective ways to address those needs. It doesn't take large amounts of money in order to bring about significant improvements in the way people live. Many of the difficulties which ordinary citizens of the South face are matters which small, locally based cooperatives or non-governmental organizations, like the Y, are quite capable of dealing with. Improving nutrition, improving sanitation, providing basic health care and primary education, ensuring that people have adequate housing and access to safe drinking water. These are the areas which are most likely to have the greatest effect on the lives of ordinary people. The Canadian government, through the Canadian International Development Agency, or CIDA, supports the work of NGOs like the Y, which promote this form of community-based social development. But still, less than 5% of Canada's foreign aid budget goes to this kind of work. I started this program by pointing out that some Canadians assume that the situation in third world countries is so bleak that nothing can be done about it. But that's not true. The significant improvements in the quality of life that have come about as a result of community-based social development proves that. There are other people in Canada, however, who argue that we shouldn't be concerned about other countries at all, that what happens elsewhere is none of our business. Many people today, especially many younger people, aren't as confident about their own futures as we have been in the past, and so they question whether we should be concerned about people living in other countries when we have so many problems of our own to deal with. That's a more difficult point of view to address. For me, and I think for the YMCA in general, concern about other countries is basically a matter of justice. Historically, there's been an unjust relationship between the nations of the North and the nations of the South, so it's only right that we should work to correct those injustices. Moral arguments, however, don't always carry a lot of weight when people are concerned about their own economic security. But then it turns out that even if all we're concerned about is our own self-interest, there are reasons to think about other countries. Canada is a trading country. The health of our economy depends in large part on our ability to trade with other countries and with those countries being able to trade with us. The third world, as we've been emphasizing in this series, now has nearly 80% of the world's people. That's a pretty significant potential market for Canadian goods and services. It's also a pretty significant source of labor and relatively inexpensive labor, and we know that some jobs have begun to move from countries in North America and other northern nations down to the South. That was one of the things many people feared was going to happen as a result of the North American Free Trade Act. And it's true that we have begun to lose certain types of jobs, in particular factory jobs, to the third world. But it's also true that as those nations grow stronger, as their populations acquire more purchasing power, they'll be able to use it to buy other kinds of goods and services from us. Then there's our concern about the environment. In the first program in this series, we considered the stand taken by many of the developing nations attending the Earth Summit at Rio in 1992, where they made it clear that if we wanted their assistance in addressing the global environmental problems we were so concerned about, then they expected us to help them deal with the immediate problems of poverty and underdevelopment in their nations first. This wasn't, as some northern media suggested, a form of blackmail. It was simply a realistic recognition of the fact that when nations are trying to meet basic human needs, environmental concerns aren't always going to be taken into consideration. Here in North America, on the other hand, concern about the rainforest, for example, has become positively trendy. There are ad campaigns, T-shirts, the covers of children's scribblers, posters, all emphasizing how important it is to protect the rainforest. Well, virtually all of the world's tropical rainforest is located in the Third World. And if we're serious about wanting them to protect this rainforest, for our benefit after all, then we're going to have to be willing to work with them in seeking solutions to the economic difficulties they have, which are forcing them to cut it down. We live in an interdependent world. What happens in one part of this planet affects us all. It affects us environmentally, economically, socially, even medically, as the spread of the AIDS virus has demonstrated. So, even if we look at these things only from the point of view of our self-interest, there are reasons to be concerned about other countries. That still doesn't answer the question of what we can do as individuals to address these issues. And there isn't an easy answer to that question. Organizations involved in this work have talked about the importance of moving from the charity mentality, which is fostered by the advertising campaigns, to a mentality of solidarity, seeking ways of acting in solidarity with the people of other countries to bring about significant change. Well, frankly, charity is easier. All it asks is that we give money. Seeking to act in solidarity can be pretty challenging. Among other things, it means making sure that we're informed about the issues. Self-education, in other words. But a lot of people find self-education as a passive response, a dull one. But I don't think we should underestimate how important it can be. Before there will be the political will to address the really difficult issues like debt forgiveness, there's going to have to be a critical mass of public opinion in the North supporting those changes. I think the situation is similar to what's taken place in environmental awareness over the past 20 years. Environmental activists have been talking about the importance of addressing environmental concerns since the 1940s. But governments only began to take action when there was a groundswell of public opinion forcing them to do so. I think what we need today is a similar groundswell of public opinion on development issues. So the first step in acting in solidarity is in informing ourselves, making sure that we're aware of the issues, and being willing to speak out about those issues. And as we become better informed, we'll discover that there are some simple changes we can make in our own lifestyles that affect developing countries. Consider that cup of coffee I just had. It turns out that that's one of 56 million cups of coffee which Canadians drink each and every day. Coffee comes from tropical countries, third world countries. About 2/3 of the world's supply comes from South and Central America. It's largely grown by small-scale farmers who can be paid as little as 5 cents a pound. By the time the coffee gets here to Fredericton, it can cost as much as $6.40 a pound. So where did the other $6.35 go? Well, there's a distribution chain the coffee travels along before it comes to me. The farmers sell their coffee to traders, who sell it to processors, who then pass the coffee on to shipping companies. There are exporters, importers, brokers, wholesalers, coffee companies, They're the ones who put their name on the coffee, and distributors. Each of these takes a cut before the coffee gets to the shelf of your local store and finally to you. We say that the coffee is worth $6.40 a pound, but most of that money remains here in Canada with the distributor and the retailer. Another big hunk goes back to the United States. That's where the coffee companies and the importers and all those guys are located. And only a few cents gets back to the people who grew it in the third world. So coffee farmers began to look for a way in which they could get a fairer share of the market value of their product. And what they came up with is called alternative or fair trade. Alternative trade increases the amount of money that the farmers paid for his coffee by eliminating the middlemen. The coffee is sold to a cooperative. The cooperative does the processing and the exporting, goes from there to an alternative trade organization. The alternative trade organization distributes it to the retailers. It's a much more compact system. Bridgehead is an example of fair trade coffee. It costs about the same as other brands. The quality's every bit as good, maybe even a little bit better. The only difference between Bridgehead and better-known brands is that because of the alternative trade route, the farmer who grew the coffee has been paid more for it. The concept of alternative trade has begun to spread to other areas as well. This is Culture's Boutique. It's an international gift store operated by the YMCA in Fredericton, which supports alternative trade not only by selling fair trade coffee and tea, but also by carrying products from cooperatives in some 30 developing countries, which support the community-based social development work they do through craft manufacture. The process is much the same as with coffee, and it works. Take this little coin purse, for example. The Mayan weaver who made this would have been paid less than 5 cents for it had it been sold through an ordinary retail operation. Because it came through the alternative trade route, she received 64 cents, and another 14 cents is available for community projects. So supporting alternative trade is a simple lifestyle choice that we can all make. For people who are looking for a more active way to be involved in promoting international development, in many communities, there's the opportunity to volunteer with non-governmental organizations like the Y, which are involved in solidarity partnerships overseas. These organizations provide an opportunity for Canadians remaining in their own communities to take an effective role in promoting self-reliant development in the South. So, where does it begin? Well, I think it begins with having the faith that change is possible, and with the recognition that change always begins with us, with you and me. We're the ones who have to take the first step. We really can't expect someone else to take it for us. So we begin by educating ourselves, by making a few simple lifestyle changes, by working collectively in non-governmental organizations to change the attitudes and opinions of the general public, our government, and other organizations. And if we take these steps, perhaps the injustices of the past can begin to be rectified. But the effort always begins with us. It isn't some vague, abstract they who are ultimately responsible for the fate of the world. In the end, it's always just us.
No matter what time of year it is, the Maritime Gardener has tips you can use. Come grow with us, Tuesdays at 8:30 on Channel 10, TVNB, your window on New Brunswick.
Daddy, can you read me a story?
Daddy's so tired. Ask Mommy.
Hey, Mommy, can Daddy read me a story?
Family, isn't it about time? From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Join Andrew Holland Wednesdays at 8:30 for New Brunswick Forum, the Year in Review, covering the issues that concern you most, only on Channel 10, TVNB.
Landmines leave gaping holes in too many lives. Please help fill them in.
The New Brunswick Community Television Archive, exploring New Brunswick's history of community television programming, is an educational initiative of CHCO-TV.